Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Getting Started for Rhino 6 for Windows. Today we will be modeling this lantern. We will look at different types of geometries, some helpful commands for modeling, and setting up our scene for rendering. My name is Doaa Alahsrif, and I work at Rhino at Robert McNeil and Associates. I'm involved in the development of training guides and technical support. My background is in architecture, and my master's was in design computing. So today is a live session and it's going to go around an hour and a half. We will cover some important terminologies, concepts, and useful commands to aid your modeling skills. And this session will be recorded and we will send you a link once the videos are ready so you can watch it at your own pace. If you have any questions, feel free to chat. And I'll be happy to stop and answer your questions. And at the end of the session, we can have an open mic where you can just, tell me your what you're interested in, and we can talk more about things that you would like me to cover. So in your material folder, you'll find a file called What is Rhino? If you can open this up, we can move on and start looking at these terminologies together. So here, what I'll do is open Rhino. Let me bring my Rhino screen here. Okay, so if you open What is Rhino, this is the screen that you will see. And to start here, we will talk about the interface. So when you open Rhino, you're going to get a blank file. This is not a blank file. This is a pre-made file or pre-saved, and it has most of the objects that Rhino has to offer. So once you open the file, you'll look at the top menu here. Of course, you're familiar with these file edit view, and there is curve surfaces solid mesh. These are ordered in hierarchy. So if you look down here, you see the same thing: curves, surface tools, and solid mesh tools. Everything. So it depends on how you like to enter your command. Some people like to go to curve and search the menu. Some people like to go under the curve tool and use the commands on this bar here or under this tab. Other people like to just type in the command and use it. So it depends on what kind of person you are. So everything can be accessible, whether menu or tabs, or you can just type in the command, let's say line, for example. And the next thing here, we talked a little about the command line, about these tabs. Everything under these tabs are available on the menus or by typing them. And this left side bar or panel here is like the standard panels. It's what's like what you need to start modeling. Everything is customizable in Rhino. So if you don't like this icon, for example, you can remove it and add something else. You can drag and drop different icons and so on. And if we look at the right panel here, we see that we have properties, we have layers, display, help, notifications. What we really care about is the first four. You can open and close different tabs by right-clicking or using this gear here. So let's say if you want to turn off notifications, you can just uncheck it. So now it's gone. You can also drag and drop, like drag it out and just close it. Or you can just hold drag the tab here and drag it back to its place. And the big chunk here, the biggest chunk of this window is the viewport. Now we're looking at perspective. You can navigate to the top view, front, right view from the tabs under here. You can also double click on the word perspective. You can see the 4 viewports, and you can maximize and minimize by double clicking. Another thing on the bottom here, this is called the OSNAP. So if you don't see this, you might have OSNAPs disabled. So if you click on this OSNAP down here, then you can see that this becomes active. And you'll see the measurements. And if you want to see or change your units, then you can change it from here. This option here or is for layers. So if you click on it, you can see the different layers you have. The same thing if we look at layers panel on the right side here. So everything is everything listed here is visible or listed here. The next thing here is grid snap. So if you want to snap to these grid lines, then you need to make sure that this grid snap is enabled. Ortho, you can make sure your lines are straight or to a certain degree. You make sure that this is enabled. And to enable and disable it, you can also hold down Shift. And gumball is really important and useful. So if I click on this ellipsoid or this sphere, then I can see this widget, and this widget is the gumball. So I can turn it on and turn it off. Record history, we're going to get to that while modeling our lantern. So a brief or a small introduction about Rhino is that Rhino is a surface modeling tool. And if we look at this first section here, which is called curves, and these so Rhino, you can obviously draw curves. There's a whole section or menu about curves, and what you can do, there are 3 different kinds of curves or degrees that we're going to look into. So if we look at this square here, we can see that once I click on it, I see these 4 circles or dots. These are called control points. So if I select this control point here, let's look at this in the top view. So double click on perspective, then double click on top. Now I am on top view, which means that it's flat, it's not perspective. And if I select my green arrow, which is the green, the y-axis in the gumball, I can start moving these control points. And as I move these control points, the shape adjusts. But if you notice that it's not flexible, it is rigid, it has sharp corners. No matter what I do with these control points, I will never get a round corner, a smooth round corner. Unlike working with this curve, for example, if I turn on or if I move the control points here, I will never get a sharp corner because this is a degree 3 curve and this is a degree 1 curve. So degree 1 curves are always very sharp and rigid. This, for example, is a degree 2 curve. If I move it, I will get sharp corners. If I move this up here, then if you notice that it is somewhat flexible, but not as flexible as a degree 3 curve. Okay, so surfaces. Now let's see, surfaces here, they do come, they're open and closed surface. So in this case, if I look under properties here, so properties is really important because it tells you everything you need to know about this selected object. So now that I select this purple surface, I can see under properties, under objects, I see that it is a surface. It is under layer, that's called surface. And and it doesn't say it's closed or open, because so if I look at this, it says it's a closed surface. So surface on its own, it means that it's an open surface. Okay, so if I delete this here, I can see that that surface, the deleted surface, was made from these curves here. And these curves, if I use the loft command, so as I mentioned before, there's so many ways that you can find a command. You can, for the loft command under surface, you can see loft here. It's saying select curves to loft. So I'm going to select these curves here, hit enter, and now I have my surface. Another way you can loft is just to type in loft. Again, select your curves and hit enter. Now you can see that you have your surface. So this is a lofted surface based on these curves, and this gave us a open surface. Unlike this this object here. So if you look at the properties, we can see that it is an open polysurface, and it is open because, as you can see, that it is an open polysurface. It is not closed. So there are different ways to close this. We will look at it later. So here is another example of a closed polysurface. So if I select this and I look at the properties here, it says it's a closed solid polysurface. But if I explode this with this explode command, I can see now under the properties panel, under object type, I can see that it is a surface because just one surface is selected. If I can delete that surface, you can see that I have now different surfaces. Okay, so I can join this again by selecting all the surfaces. So let's select everything here and hit the join command, this puzzle icon here. Now it is closed, like it is joined, not closed, but joined. So you can close this by, let's say, you can use the cap command. So under solid, there is an option for cap planar hole. And now look at the command line. It says closed solid polysurface. So I'm going to undo this. You see that it's open. And once I use the command cap planar hole, then if you look again to the properties, you can see that it's turned into a closed solid polysurface. Okay, so again, a polysurface is, it just means like a group of surfaces. So now this is an open polysurface. So if I explode this here, I can see that it is made out of many different surfaces. So let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 surfaces that made this object. And so, yeah, so that's the difference between an open polysurface and a closed polysurface. So the next thing here is a closed surface. So what's the difference between a closed surface and a closed polysurface? Well, a closed surface is a surface of revolution, and you can't really explode it. So look at the command line here on top. If I try to explode this sphere, I get an error or a comment that says cannot explode single surface. So this is considered a single surface, which is made from a revolution, and it cannot be exploded. The same thing with this surface here. Last thing is are the meshes. So if you look at this sphere here, this is a closed surface, and if we look at this mesh, it's a closed mesh. But let me, if I hold down Shift, I can select both of these together. And if we just look at the structure of these spheres, they are identical, but one is a surface and the other is a mesh. And if you look here, you see these, this yellow circle, or that kind of looks like a loop around this sphere. This is an isocurve. But if you look at this structure here, it kind of looks, it's more dense, and this is made out of mesh faces and vertices. So if we look at the details here, so details gives you the details. Let me, oops, hold on. It's down here somewhere. Okay. So if we look at the details here, we can see that it is a closed mesh, and it has around 2,000 vertices and 2,000 faces. But if we look at this sphere, we can see that it is a surface of revolution. It's a valid surface. It is just, there's nothing really there. So if we explode this, then the file size gets bigger, slower, and meshes are really good for rendering. So if you have like a SketchUp model that you want to bring to Rhino for rendering, then that's fine. But yeah, don't try to explode it, because the file is going to get just, really, really huge. Okay, so that's everything, like very brief about Rhino and what it has to offer. So the next thing we'll do is just open a new file and start working or start modeling the lantern. So to open a new file, I'm going to do File, New, and then I'm going to use a small centimeter model. I'm going to use this template. This is this folder shows you the templates that are available. So you can choose no template, but for now I'm going to use the default small object centimeters template and just say open. Now I get a blank new Rhino. Okay. So to start, I'm going to bring in the rendered picture of the lantern so we can see what we're modeling as we model it. So to bring in a picture here, we can type in the word picture on the command line. It's going to show you or navigate to your desktop or any file on. You can browse to the file or the folder with the file, the picture, and just bring it in. Another way you can do this, go under Surface, Plane, and Picture. Okay, so now we know. I'm going to put it up here so that we can see that we can see what we're modeling as we model it. Okay, so remember, this is the top view here. We can double click and look at 4 views. So to start, I'm going to create my layers. So under the layer panel, I will double click on layer 1, and let's call this base. Layer 2, let's do body. And we have the top. We have the handle. Glass. I'm going to create a new layer, call it candle. Another layer. I believe that's it. We might add another layer later. Okay. So let's double click on base and make it current. And current means that everything drawn here is going to be under this layer. Okay. So for the base, I'm going to start at 0. This here is the origin, which is 0, 0, 0. And just shortcut for this. If you look at the command line, so the command line here is your best friend. So anything you need to do or you want to do, you can always ask the command line. So, and always read it because it tells you what to do next. So as I hit on the rectangle corner to corner tool, then it says here on the command line, first corner of rectangle. Okay, where is the first corner? So my first corner is here, 0, 0, 0. So I can just, for a shortcut, I can just type in 0, hit enter. And now it snaps to the origin. And the other length, I know I wanted 15, enter, and another 15, and hit enter. Okay. So now this here is my base. The next thing I want to do is, let's work in perspective here. So I want to offset this to create the bottom part here. If you look at this picture, so the bottom part, so the top part here is the 15 by 15. Now I'm going to work with the bottom. So I'm going to offset. I can just type in offset or go under the curve menu and look for offset curve. And I'm going to choose 2 centimeters and click. So now I have 2 squares actually. Okay. Now I want to extrude this to create a thickness to the bottom. So there is a command called Extrude Curve. So under surfaces or surface, there is Extrude Curve straight. And then I'm gonna type -2, oops, so that it goes down to the minus direction. So if we look at the perspective here, we can see that there is an arrow. This arrow gives us a bunch of display modes. So if you look at this viewport here, we can see our model, but it's in wireframe. It's not in shaded. So we can shade it by clicking on this arrow and then clicking on the shaded option. Now we see that we have our extrusion. However, it's not capped. So it means it's not solid. So remember, if we go under properties and object type, we see that it's an open extrusion, but we need to make it as a solid. So as I showed you before, there's a command called cap. So under solid, cap planar holes. This makes it a solid, but I'm going to undo these and show you in the same command where you extrude your surface. So under surface, extrude curve straight. There is an option on the command line that says solid equals yes or no. So by default, it's set to no, and I'm going to set it to yes, and look what happens. So 2, enter. Now I have a solid. So if I click on it, look at object type, I can see that it is a closed extrusion. Okay. The next step here, we're going to do the body. So select our smaller square and do the same thing, extrude it. This time I'm going to type the command, extrude curve, and then it's a solid yes, that's what we want. And let's look at 20 centimeters and say enter. Okay. So let's look at the layers here. I can see that it's red. This means that it is under the base layer, and we can know because it's the current layer. So to change this to a different layer, we can go under here. You see the base where it says base. If you click on it, then you can change this to body. Now it is purple. This means that it is under the body layer. Okay. So before we move on, what we need to do is create a chamfered edge here. Then we will mirror it to the top. Okay. So to create that, there is a command called chamfer. You can type it, Shumpert Edge. And if you don't know where the command is, the nice option here, it's the help option. So you can type in anything you want, Shumpert Edge, and the help always tells you where the command is. So it says here on the toolbar, it's under solid fillet edge chamfer. So under solid, if you go down to fillet edge, there is a chamfer option down here. Okay. So if let's do that again. There is an option for chain edges, and let's see, face edge, that's easier. So select the face, hit enter, chamfer by 1, say OK, and now we have our chamfer. If you notice that it had like chamfered and cut these edges out. Okay, so I believe it looks good. So I'm gonna take this and let's look at this front view. Now I want to take this base and mirror it to the top so that, let's look at this, we can get this gray border on the top. So let's double click on the front view here and let's mirror this. So again, with the mirror command, we can, it is, I believe, under transform, mirror, select your object to mirror, enter, start. So to start, I want to snap to the midpoint. So make sure that the mid snap here is checked. And if you don't have this ribbon down here, you can always click on O snap and you'll get this O snap tools. So make sure the mid point is checked. And as you move along this edge, once you snap to the midpoint, it's gonna just tell you that's the midpoint to midpoint. And now I have the top and the bottom. Okay. The next thing I want to do is create an opening here. Okay. So to do that, I want to first of all duplicate the edge. Okay, there's a command for that. It's called dupe face border. Okay, so it's under curve, curve from objects, and duplicate face border. If you want to type it, you're going to type dupe face border. And now you select the face. You see that it is selected and you hit enter. Now you get a curve based on that edge. Okay, so let's look at this again in the front view. What we need to do now is offset. So we looked at this command before under curve, offset, offset curve, and we're gonna offset this by, let's say, 3 centimeters. Now we have this opening. I mean, this curve that is going to become an opening. Again, what we want to do is extrude this. So extrude curve straight. So the reason I am doing this is to Boolean difference one from the other so that we get this opening. So now I have this purple. Let's change its color. So let's create a default, let's call the default layer references. Okay, and I'm gonna make it, okay, black is fine. Let's keep it. I can change its color, but I'm gonna keep it as black. Okay, so okay, the reason I deleted that, it's because it's not solid, it's not capped. So again, I'm going to look at the command line before hitting enter. So select the curve under surface, extrude curve straight. Look at the command line. It says solid no, but I'm going to change that to solid yes. Another thing I want to do is both sides no. I'm going to change that to both sides yes, so that it expands or it extrudes to both directions. Okay, so now I have this box here. Alrighty. So let's repeat the dupe edge thing here. So under surfaces, under curve, curve from objects, and dupe face border. Select your face, hit enter. You get a curve that is that represents that border. Let's offset this. You can type offset. And now you have that curve. Select that curve and same thing, extrude curve straight, both sides yes. Now you have two extrusions that are going in different directions. So we're going to use these two extrusions to create our openings in our body geometry. Okay, so to create this this opening, we're going to use a Boolean difference. So you see these two spheres? There's a small arrow next to it. If you click on that arrow, then you can see this command called Boolean difference. Once you click on it, it's going to ask you for a surface to subtract from. So I want to subtract from this purple box. Hit enter. And subtract with, I'm going to select both of these extrusion, hit enter, and now I have my openings. Okay, so now I have my opening, I have my base, I have my top. What I want to do here is maybe move this. Let's go to the front view and move this a little. So grid snap is on, so I am going to disable my grid snap. I'm going to move this to the bottom here so that it intersects. So let's look at this and shade it. I want to make sure this intersects just because I want to create the Boolean difference again. So let's go look at this. So I can type in Boolean difference, select surface to subtract from, oops, Boolean difference, subtract from this red one, and subtract with this purple one. So here's what happened. I'm going to undo this and let's go back to Boolean difference. Select surface to subtract from. I want to subtract from this red one. Subtract with, I want to click on this, but if you look at the top, the command line here, it says delete input equals yes. So because what it did before, it deleted the input. So I'm going to set this to no, and now click on my purple object, hit enter. Now both objects are there. If I look at this, I'll move it to the top, back to the top. I can see that it did cut the geometry, and now it is so, and then both objects are there. Nothing got deleted. So I'm gonna move this there to create my border. Okay. So now let's go back to the picture. What we're gonna do here is create the top part here. To do that, we're gonna use similar commands. The first one is duplicate face border. Okay, so I want to create duplicate the face of this top. So again, dupe face border, or I can find it under curves, curve from object, dupe face border, and hit enter. Now I get this boundary or border. Okay. The next thing I want to do is put a point here in the center so that I can see the center of this object. So I'm going to select a point. I'm going to make sure my center O snap is on. And as I hover over this curve, I can see that there is a point in the center and there's a white line. This white line tells me that this is the center of that curve. So I'm going to click enter. Now I have this, I have this point at the center. I'm going to use it to create a line that represents the height. So now I want to snap to this point, but it doesn't snap to it. That's because my point snap is not enabled. So if I make sure it's checked, as I hover over it, it tells me that this is a point. So I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go back to the front view. I'm going to hold down Shift. So as I mentioned before, if you look down at ortho, so now I'm not holding down Shift. As I hold down Shift, this ortho becomes enabled. So I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to type in 6 for the height. Oop, 6, or let's try 10. Maybe 6 is too short. Probably 8. Okay. So 8, enter, click, and enter to end the command. Okay. So now I have this line here. And the next thing I want to do is create a line, another line from that end point. And again, it doesn't snap to the end because the end O snap is off. So from that end, as I enable the end O snap, then I can snap to the end, from the end to the midpoint of that curve. Okay. Now I have this curve to play with. So let's go back to the front view. And as I mentioned before, that this is a line, and a line is a degree 1, which means that if I move this control point, it's still going to be, rigid. And so what I need to do is convert this line from a degree 1 to a degree 3 and add more control points, because if you look at this line here, let's turn on these control points. It has just 2 points. So I need more points to make this more flexible. So to do that, there is a command called rebuild, and you can find it under edit. So edit, rebuild. And now we get this window that says that how many control points do you want and what degree would you like. So in this case, 13 is just too much. So I'm going to choose 5. And degree 3 means more flexible. So I'm going to keep it at degree 3 and say OK. So now if I look at these control points, I can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I move these around, you see now I have a flexible curve. Okay. So what we will do here is move these around to create the shape of the top of the lantern. Okay. So we're going to play with this a little. Probably something like that. Okay, so let's go back to perspective and let's look at our curve. Okay, so we might adjust this later, but let's look how it's gonna look in 3D. So this is kind of called like a profile curve. So we're gonna use this to sweep around this curve right here. Okay, so to use the sweep command, it's under surface, sweep one rail in this case. So the rail is the border. Okay, and if you look at the command line, it says select cross section. And now this profile curve is the cross section. Hit OK. And now we have our top. Let's hit enter and look at this top. So I'm going to click on it and make sure I'm going to move it to the top layer to look at it. It might need a little adjustment. So let's delete this and try it again. So again, gonna go back to the front view. Maybe move this control point a little bit inside. Probably. Okay. And now I'm going to create the sweep. So in this case, I'm going to use a history because history will allow me to update the shape as I model. So I'm going to make sure record history is on and go under surface, sweep one rail, select your rail, look at the command line, select rail, select section, make sure history is on and hit OK. You get this, where is it? Let's see. This menu here, accept defaults, and now you have your shape. So because history was on, now if I select my curve, and as I move this around, look at my shape, it updates. Okay. So let's look at this in ghosted mode. So if there is a display mode called ghosted, and this will allow you to see through. In this case, I want it to see through so that I can snap or select these points that are inside my geometry. So maybe, okay. Again, let's go back to shaded. Okay. Alrighty, so now I have my top here. Let's again move this to the top layer. What I need to do now is if I select it, go to properties, it is open polysurface. What I need to do here is cap it. So under solid, there's a command called cap planar holes, and this says it broke history. So once history can be broken with these commands, but you have to make sure that this is the design that you want before breaking it. Another option you can do is always copy geometries that have history on so that you can go back and manipulate it. Okay, but in this case, this is fine here. The next option we'll do is create the top cylinder. So again, I'm gonna go to the square, this arrow here next to the box, and choose a cylinder. It's going to ask for the base, and let's see here. The base is the center of this square. So to find it, I'm going to create a line from one end to another. And I'm going to use the center of that line, or the midpoint, to create my cylinder. So you can create the cylinder from an extrusion of a circle, or you can choose the cylinder option here and create this cylinder here. And let's do 3. Okay. Next thing, we're going to do this cap that is on top here. And again, with the same cylinder, I'm going to scale this. So with the gumball, I'm going to hold down Alt, and Alt creates a copy. So Alt and move to the top. Now I have a copy. And again, with the same gumball, we are going to, let's go to Ghosted and use our scale from the gumball to scale this down. Okay. And with the red arrow, again, holding down Shift, it will scale uniformly. So that's what we're going to do here. Whoop, too big. That went too far. Okay. Alrighty. Gonna move with the gumball, move this down. Okay. Now go back to shaded. So the next thing we'll do here is create a fillet. We're gonna fillet these edges so that they look smooth. So under surface, under solid, fillet edge. And now we're gonna select our edge. Probably one is too big. Let's create, so spacebar or enter repeats the last command, and let's do 0.2 probably is better, and 0.2 again. Alrighty. So now we have a smoother looking cylinder on top. Alrighty, so the next thing we want to do here is to create these openings. So if we look at the image, we have these waves on this cylinder. So let's do that here. So, and to do this, I'm going to need to hide everything in my scene except for this cylinder up here. Okay. So do you see this light bulb icon? There is this arrow. If you click on it, there is an icon that's called Isolate Objects. This means isolate the selected or invert hide what is selected. So I'm going to select this. Now all I see is the cylinder. Everything else is hidden. So we're going to need to do, first of all, it is a closed extrusion, and what I want is only the surface that is this outer surface. I don't need the top and bottom for this. Okay. So the first thing I will do here is to explode this. That's one way to do it. I'm going to explode and delete top and bottom. Another option I can do is just hold down Control and Shift. And now it will allow me to select this so Control and Shift the top, Control Shift the bottom, and hit delete. This will also allow me to only keep my the surface. So select that. Now I have my surface. What I need to do is to know the boundary of the surface. So now, again, this is a surface and it is a cylinder. So what I want to do is unroll this surface so that it's flat, so I can draw these waves on it and then wrap it around that cylinder again. Okay, so it's going to make sense now. So there is a command called create UV curve, and I believe it is under curve from objects, and there's the command. It's called create UV curves. Okay, so let's do that again. Under curves, curve from object, create UV curve, select surface to create UV. I'm going to select my surface, hit enter, and now look what I see. Now, this is telling me that if this surface or this cylinder was unrolled, this is what you'll get, okay? So what I want to do is select this, move it. So I believe I've done this command twice, but I'm going to move it here to the side. Okay, let's look at this from the top view here. Okay, so now this is my cylinder, flat cylinder or unrolled cylinder. What I want to do here is create the waves. So to do that, I need to explode this. So now exploding it gives me line segments. If I don't explode it, oops, I click on it, then I get a closed curve. So I really want these line segments. And the next thing I want, okay, right, before I do that, I want to offset this to create a border. So let's do offset, and 3 is very big, so let's do 0.3. Okay, now I'm gonna explode this inner rectangle. Okay, I'm gonna delete the top and bottom, and I'm gonna use these curves to tween and get multiple curves with equal distance in between them. And I'm going to use history, and this will allow me to create the waves that you saw in the picture. Okay. So the command is called Tween Curves. You can find this command here under this control point curve. The last command is called Tween. And on the menu, I believe you'll find it under the curve tools, the tween curves. Okay. So if you look at the command line, it's going to say that select the start and end curves. So I have my start and I have my end. But here's the issue, that these curves here are only a degree 1 curve. So if you look at these control point structure, we can see that it is one control point and it won't get smooth, curvy as I wanted. So before going into that command, what I need to do is rebuild these curves. So I'm going to select both curves here and then type rebuild, or go under edit, rebuild, and I'm going to keep it at 5 and choose a degree 3, say OK. Now if I move this, then I get the curve that I want. Okay. So again, back to tween. So under curves, under curve, tween curves, select start and end. I want to make sure that my history is on. Okay, and now hit, look at the command line. It says number of curves that you want in between. So in this case, I would say, let's try 30. It might be, no, actually it's not too many. All right, 30 is fine. So 30, you see the preview, you like what you see, then you hit enter. Okay. So now all I can see is that there are equal distance between many curves. But because history was on, and because we rebuilt this curve, now if I select a control point here and move this, you see what happened? It updates. So let's move this again, select this point, and I can see that it updates as I move. Okay, which is really interesting. So let's do that. Let's play a little with our curve here. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is close these curves. So these are open curves. So what I'm going to do here is, let's see if you notice that it is snapping to the center of that rectangle, and it's really annoying me. So I'm going to uncheck that center and probably uncheck. I don't need these. I just need the end because I'm going to close these curves here. End to end. Again, gonna repeat that command and end to end. Gonna select both of these curves, and probably an array would work. Let's try that. Array. So I know they have 30, so probably let's try 15 in the Y. I don't need this in the Y nor in the Z. So the spacing is from here to there. And now I get this. Awesome. I missed one. So let's do that. I'm just gonna copy because it's only one. Okay. Okay. So now I have my curves. And as remember when we broke history at the beginning, so we are going to break history now. And what you can do here is copy this if you don't want to break history. So I'm going to hold down Alt key and move the green arrow in the control points, and that would allow me to create a copy. So I'm going to break history in one and keep the other for reference. And now I'm going to join. Okay. So now these are all joined together. And what I want to do here is extrude them to create a geometry that I can Boolean difference out of that cylinder. Okay. So I'm going to hold down Control to unselect the boundary, and then let's look at this in perspective. Now I'm going to extrude, and I'm going to make sure that I extrude this both sides. So you can type in extrude or under surface, extrude curve straight. And I need to make sure both sides is set to yes and solid is set to yes as well. I don't really care about the distance here because I just want this to be both sides and thick enough to pass through my cylinder. Okay, so I think that's fine here. Let's go back to perspective. And now we see that we have our curvy or wavy geometry. Okay, the next thing I want to do is select everything here, and I'm going to rotate this. Oops, let's go to front view. Rotate this so it is the same orientation as my cylinder. So let's rotate this here with the gumball. Type in 90. And go to the front view. So I don't need to move it up, but I'm just going to move it up here just so that we can see both of these geometries together. Okay. Alrighty. So just to remind you, this rectangle is the boundary of this cylinder. So as if we unrolled the cylinder and we get a flat piece, this would be it. And we used Tween to create these wavy dancing geometry. So the next thing I want to do is like wrap these waves around this cylinder. And to do that, I'm going to use the flow command. Okay, and the flow command, it needs a base curve. And the base curve is this bottom curve. But if you notice that it is a closed curve, so what I'm going to do is explode it and just use the bottom segment of that rectangle. Okay. So to access the flow command is under the transform and flow along curve. Okay. So look at the command line. It asks you to select objects to flow along a curve. And these objects are these curves here. Hit enter. It's going to ask you for the base curve. I'm going to select my base curve. Now look at the command line. It's going to ask you for the target curve. I'm going to use the base edge of that cylinder. Now look, it wraps around it. And let's look at this in perspective to make sure that it looks fine. It does looks right. Okay, so I'm going to select this. I'm going to use this magnifying icon to zoom select it. Now I can see that it does pass through. It looks correct. Everything looks fine. Perfect. The next thing I want to do is Boolean difference. But if you look at this surface, it is surface. It doesn't have any thickness. So if I'm gonna, I need it to have thickness to be able to create the Boolean difference. So what I'm gonna do now is cap it like before. So let's cap. Use this command again. Solid cap planar holes. Select that. Hit enter. The next thing I need to do is create a shell. So I don't believe this command is on the menu, but if you type in shell, you can access that command. So select the face to remove. I want to remove the bottom face. What a shell does is creates a thickness to the it makes a solid shape, a solid ball. You're gonna get it in a minute. So if a thickness, I'm gonna change that to 0.2. Select the face. I want to remove the bottom face. So select the bottom face, hit enter, and now I have, if I look at this in Ghosted, I see that it has a thickness from all sides except, and it is a closed, it does create a closed poly surface, and it gives me an open bottom. Okay, the next thing I want to do here is do the Boolean difference. So again, Boolean difference, subtract from my cylinder, and subtract with, I'm going to select my waves here, hit enter. And if I see that it is like the Boolean happened, but it did not delete my object. So again, I'm going to try that again. Boolean difference, select your subtract from, subtract with, make sure delete input is set to yes, hit enter. Now it deletes my geometry and it gives me that wavy cylinder. And I'm going to right click on the light bulb to show everything else on my screen. Okay, so I'm going to select this and move it back there. Okay, so let's look at the layers. I'm going to select the top and again move this to the top layer here. Okay. Oop. Alrighty. So the next thing we will work on is the handle. To create the handle, I want to create an ellipsoid here. So to do that, let's work with this in the right view. Let's go to this box and choose an ellipsoid from center. Make sure the near is on so that you can snap to that line. And let's draw our ellipsoid. Whoop. Huh. Let's look at this in the top view. This is really huge. We want a flat ellipsoid. Again, you can do this with a sphere and scale it in one direction. Okay, so ellipsoid or a sphere doesn't really matter. They both give you the same thing. Okay, I'm gonna select my ellipsoid. Gonna scale it a little. Oop. And there you go. Okie dokie. And now from this, I'm going to create the handle, okay, from the center of that. So let's look at this in wireframe. Okay, now I have my ellipsoid, and I'm going to, first of all, mirror this to the other side. So I'm going to type in mirror, or under transform mirror, and it's going to ask for the mirror axis. Snap to that line. Okay, now I have both of these. So I'm going to use a control point curve to create this handle. So again, I'm going to snap. I'm going to just click on to create this handle, and I'm going to modify the control points here once I'm done drawing these or this curve. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is maybe, whoop, using the control point curve or the control points, I'm going to modify these points here. Okay, so now let's look at this in perspective. I can see that it is not flat and it's not onto the C-plane. So there is a way to fix this. So if I look at this in front view, I can see that it looks flat, but not in perspective. So there is a command called project to C-plane. So you can type this, project, and as you type, it auto-completes. And delete input, you say yes. And now look at the perspective, it becomes flat. All I need to do is move it to its right place. Okay, there you go. Alrighty. So again, I'm gonna modify these control points. And once I'm done with this, I'm gonna create a pipe. So let's go to perspective, look at this, and let's do a pipe. So with the pipe, there is, where can you find pipe, is under solid pipe, and select the rail. Diameter, radius is 1 and 1 is too big. So let's do 0.3. Probably it's too big. 2, hit enter. 0.3 looks fine, I guess. Alrighty. No, it is really huge. So what we can do here is scale our ellipsoids. So let's look at the ellipsoid here and scale it up. Double click, go back to perspective, select the other one, or you can just delete the other one and mirror this to the other side. Okay. So the next thing we'll do like a candle holder. And again, with the same thing as we did this part here with the shell command. So we'll do a cylinder. To place the cylinder in the center, we need to find the midpoint from end to end. And now we'll create the cylinder. I don't see the midpoint. That's because the mid-O snap is off. So let's select that. Make sure we have our cylinder. So again, it is closed. So what I need to do is shell. So again, with the shell command, it's not on the menu. I'll just type in shell. I'll do 0.2, hit enter, and now I have this candle holder. I'm gonna move this to glass because it's gonna have a glass material. And probably let's create the candle. So the next thing we'll do is draw another cylinder, and let's go to ghosted so that we can see the midpoint here. A smaller cylinder, and select this, move it to the top. And what I'm gonna do is hide this candle layer so that we work with the candle. So this is under glass, sorry. So let's hide the glass and move this to the candle layer. Okay. So I'm gonna use a fillet command, fillet edge, to soften this edge here. Probably 0.2 is too much, or maybe that's fine. Let's create another cylinder from the center of that. You see, if I hover over the edge here, I can snap to the center. And let's create a cylinder that goes in and Boolean so that we can get the thread of the candle in it. So let's do that. Okay. So if I Boolean difference, I'm going to get a sharp edge or a sharp, edge. So I need to soften this up a bit. So again, with the fillet surface, fillet edge, which I'll find under solid, fillet edge, fillet edge. I'm going to keep it at 0.2, hit enter. And maybe that's too big. Let's do a 0.1. Okay. Gonna move it down a little more. And do a Boolean difference. I can type it and select subtract from the big one and subtract with the small one. Now I get this small opening. Again, with the fillet command, fillet edge, I'm gonna fillet this edge here to create 0.05 to create a softer edge here. So again, with the glass and the candle, now I have my shape here. And the next thing we will look at is assigning color for rendering or assigning materials. So if I go under perspective, under this arrow next to perspective to look at the rendered display mode, I can see that I have my shape. It's all white. There isn't any color to it. I can render it, but first I'm gonna add materials. Okay. So to add materials here, we need, there are two different ways, by object or by materials. So if we look at the layer panel, we can see that we have a material column here. And next to each layer, there's this bubble here that you can click on to get to the material editor. Okay. So let's look at the base here. In this case, I have only one material, and this is the picture that we entered, like the first thing we did. So what we need to do here is use a new material. There are custom materials from the material library, and you can make your own. So first of all, I'm gonna use wood. So I'm gonna import from library, and I'm gonna go down to the wood folder, and I'm gonna choose under the oak folder, and let's look at the oak material. Once that's set, hit OK. Now I see that I have the oak material on my top and bottom. Okay. I'm gonna set the same material to the body. So click, same thing, click on this material editor. We get we get to this material window, and I'm gonna choose the same material here and hit OK. And for the top, we can go to the material editor and use new material, import from library. We're going to look at metal. Let's look at matte and probably choose the aquamarine. Hit OK. You can adjust the color, adjust the roughness if you want it more polished or more rough, and say OK. Same thing with the handle. I'm gonna use a new material from library. Let's do metal and maybe polished. Let's do polished aluminum. Let's see how it's gonna look. Is this on the same? Okay, so I don't see any difference because it's on the reference layer. What we need to do is move this to the handle layer. Now we see that it has the chrome finishing. I'm gonna select these ellipsoid and make sure they are on the handle layer as well. Okay. Alrighty. So now we have our okay, the glass is left here. So glass, I'm gonna select this, create a new material, and we have custom default Rhino glass. So I'm gonna select that. So I'll change the color to probably bluish glass, grayish. Okay. Now I see that it's transparent. It has this blue color to it. And now the candle. Again, it is on the candle layer, so let's add material to that. So in this case, I'm gonna use a custom material, and I'm gonna give it a beige color, tan, blonde. Okay. And add a little bit of transparency to it. It does have a little gloss to it, but not much. And say OK. Alright, now we have our lantern. The next thing we want to do here is probably use different materials but by object instead of by layer. So what I want to do here is select my lantern, make a copy. So again, hold down Alt, move the gumball arrows, and if you see this plus sign that is on or next to the cursor, this means that it is creating a copy. And let's make it smaller, scale it all down. Okay. And now let's look at this from the front view, and let's move this closer and to the bottom. Oop. The next thing, so I'm gonna delete this image here. We don't need this anymore. So in case you want to add materials by object instead of by layer, you there is under properties this paint tube. If you click on it, it tells you use layer material, but you say no, I want to use object material. So you just create a new material from library. Let's give it another wood color or just paint color. Let's try paint. And probably change its color. And same thing with this top here. Let's do the same, change color. You can change it custom. Give it a color, a gloss finish, little reflectivity, and that's it. Let's take that and again give it color. So you can rename material. Let's call this white eggshell paint. Now you know you can choose easily the material. Okay. Let's make another or a third copy here. So Alt and drag. It's going to create a copy. Okay. And now hold down Shift and scale. So we can scale uniformly. And now let's move this again to the bottom. And again, you can change another color if you like. Let's custom from library. So what was that? Is it the body? Yes. So let's do another paint color. So if you have these, you can't see the materials, you can always do large icons so you can know what you're looking at. Okay. So So setting up the environment for rendering, what you need to do here is, at this point you can just render because you have already set up the material. So the next thing you want to do is, it depends if it's an outdoor scene, an indoor scene, you can choose different kinds of lighting. You can make sure if you want skylight on or off. So if you go to options here, you can change the resolution of your screen under render. In this case, it's set to current viewport, so it's going to use the viewport resolution. You can change that the dimensions here. And if you scroll down, you can see that you can have lighting settings. You want the sun on or off, skylight on or off. Skylight always gives you a really nice light, but it takes a lot of time to render. And another option you can play with is the background here. So backdrop. You can also access that from this panel here. You have the rendering. Let's look at rendering panel. You can see everything down here. Instead of going through options, you can also have the environments on. And this would give you, if you have HDRI environments, if you want to put sky, everything is done from here. You can add a background image, a high dynamic range. Yeah. So if we render this as it is here, let's do that. Render. So if you look at our screen, we can see that it is rendering at 1% right now. It's gonna take around 7 minutes, 8 minutes remaining to finish the rendering. And that's because skylight is on. But if we turn off skylight, then the rendering will become faster, but not necessarily a better image. So I'm gonna close this for now, and let's look at the material panel here. As we saw before, it has all the material library that we have in the scene. Another option that comes with Rhino 6 is Arctic, which gives you a clear white clay render. And another option is Ray Traced, which renders in real time. So as I move my cursor, it renders the scene. As I'm looking at the scene now, I can see that the glass is just too blue. So that's one benefit of real-time render. You don't have to wait for the results like 7-8 minutes or sometimes or usually more than that. So I'm going to change my glass to let's do, oops, what is that? Okay. I don't see my color window here. Oops. Sorry about that. Interesting. I do not see my color window. It says it's up here, but it isn't. Okay, there it is. Close. Alright, let's close this. Let me go back to rendered. And let me change the glass color. Okay. Okay, too dark, I guess. So, okay, let's hit OK. And now go back to ray trace to make sure that it looks good in render before actually taking the time and rendering it. So if you look down here, it says it is ray traced, it is using cycles, and it's rendering at 10 seconds now, and it's giving me around 95, 99, 103. These are like the frames, frame count that it's rendering. Okay, so we can see here that this is off the ground, so we need to move this down. And yeah, actually this is the benefit of ray trace, that you can have a sneak peek of what your rendering will look like before actually rendering it. So, does anyone have any questions? Our session here is done for the day. So if you have any questions, please let me know.